Okay, so first of all, thank you everyone for coming. And just by way of introduction, I'd like to explain how I came into this, how I came into my whole Israeli map project and my whole study of the area. And it really, in many ways, tracks a lot of what we're talking about today. In the late 70s, early 80s, I went to Cornell University. And I was one Jewish boy sitting at the Israel desk with a flag of Israel. Years of my Cornell time. There were two Palestinian Arab graduate students, very intelligent. And for 4 years, they harangued whoever was at the table with a very simple and effective, and in my particular view, lethal argument. They'd look at him and they'd say, "How old are you?" And they'd say, 18, 19. "Have you ever been in the Israeli army?" "Nope." "Well, hold a second. You've never been in the Israeli army?" "No." "Don't you know there are Israeli generals who say you can give up the whole West Bank and it's no problem?" Okay? Well, you know what? You are the obstacle to peace. Because if there are Israeli generals who say you can give up the West Bank, how come you, sitting behind this table who've never been in the Israeli army, are somehow saying you're supporting Israel when Israel isn't giving up the West Bank? Now, what that really was something much, much more profound, in that there are Israeli generals who, quote unquote, say you can give up the West Bank. And there are also Israeli generals who say you can keep the West Bank. And so as I grew, I became a lawyer and I would go to Israel events, it was even more confusing. Because I'd go to one Israel event and you'd have a diplomat expert say, you got to keep the West Bank for Israeli security. The other would say, you've got to give it up. I felt like I was in a revolving door. And I tried to understand what exactly are these people arguing about. What are these two military supposed experts arguing about? Because you rarely have two doctors that have such diametrically opposed views of what should be done in a medical situation. Here you have military experts. So, long story short, came up with my map, and for about 25 years, it was actually before Oslo, I've been showing people my map. And with no further ado, let me get to the heart of the story. The issue here is not just anti-Semitism in a vacuum. That's not the issue. If that were the only issue, meaning you had anti-Semitism in the world, and there were going to be Jews that are going to be either threatened or killed, that would be a terrible, horrific thing. And that's one thing. However, we have learned from history that it often repeats itself. And I'm now going to be giving sort of the talk I gave at the UN, but with extra stuff added. And it's on videotape, so if you want to show it to your friends, you'll see the PowerPoint. And I'll take you through the PowerPoint, and at some times I'll come up and show you the map. So my basic thesis was Israel's fight today will be the world's fight tomorrow. And what is that? What am I saying? I'm saying, guys, this is not just an anti-Semitism that begins and ends with the murder of 6 million. I'm saying this is of what could very well be a world war that kills a great many people, including American citizens. And how I'm going to get there is I'm going to first start with a news clip. And I didn't even know how prescient this news clip was at the time. It was September 2nd, which is this month, or not this month, a month ago. And it was by the defense minister of Israel, Moshe Ya'alon. And he had two things to say, which I'm going to really be focusing on in this talk. The first is, a West Bank withdrawal will lead to rocket and mortar fire on Ben Gurion Airport. That's statement number one. But statement number 2, which actually was just officially echoed in Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech at the UN, was he said, we have to look at a diplomatic process outside the box before withdrawing from the West Bank, mentioning newfound strategic interests shared with moderate Arab states. Now, I'm, for the moment, not going to get into whether the Arab states are moderate or not. That's really for another day. But what I'm going to say in the short, very short title is Israel Today, the World Tomorrow. Now, how am I going to get there? I'm starting in the anti-Semitism of 1938. Not even the anti-Semitism of 1939. We're just talking Kristallnacht. Now, I would say that if you lived in 1938, it would have been rather difficult for you to go from Nazis burning down synagogues and killing Jews in Germany and in Austria to Hitler taking over Europe and invading and causing a world war and killing 50 million people. I think it would have been a leap. Okay. However, I'm going to be showing you through maps and graphics a straight, dead straight line where you don't have to jump from today's anti-Zionism to a world war, to an Islamist sweep. How am I going to get there? I'm going to get there through maps. And it's not going to be an emotional thing. I'm just going to show you a bunch of maps and you'll look at it and we'll come to a conclusion whether I've got a point or not. Now, I would be remiss if I did not explain the picture on the left. The picture on the left is, or was, a 16-year-old Jewish Israeli boy called Daniel Viflik. And you are seeing to the right his yellow school bus that was just outside of the Gaza Strip before a Hamas terrorist fired an anti-tank missile into a yellow school bus and killed this. That's what it looks like. That's how big, just so everyone understands how big an anti-tank missile is that caused that damage from 5 kilometers away, which is roughly 3 miles. Now also I want everyone to see on the bottom, that left picture, the bottom picture. It's very important when you look at the damage that's done by these rockets, you got to look at the holes that are created. Because the holes means it wasn't just a normal explosion. And killed, not really, they're called anti-personal, because just like in the Boston bombing, the Boston Marathon bombing, if you noticed, a lot of people didn't get killed. But a lot of people got legs taken off or arms taken off. Why? Because they didn't make a bomb with explosive, they made a bomb with screws and ball bearings. So that's what we're up against. Now how am I going to get there? Well, I'm not going to start with my maps. I'm going to start with a map from 1582 by a German pastor. 1582. Understand this is just 100 years after Columbus discovered America, or 600 years before President Obama was receiving only 41% of his intelligence briefings in the morning. He made a map of how he saw the world. And how he saw the world was within Israel, a Jerusalem, in the center. Not because of anything other than it is the crossroads. Israel happens to be the crossroads between Asia and Africa, Africa and Europe, and Asia and Europe. It just, what I'm going to show you is that this Heinrich Bunting map is as vital to understand today's critical importance of Israel as it was in 1582. Now you're going to say, Mark, come on. How are you going to do that? Okay. And I'm going to do that with my first map that I made. Now, in this map, you can see that blue line in the upper left-hand corner. You see that diagonal blue line? Okay. I call that the dividing line. In that everything to the bottom right, there's roughly 370 million Muslims. And this does not include Pakistan, Nigeria, Indonesia, India. We're just talking on this rectangle that you see, there are 370 million Muslims in the bottom right. In the upper left, there is a country called Greece that has got a total of 11 million Christians. Now, I just got one question. What is the only non-Muslim country between 370 million Muslims and 11 million Greeks? Well, go back to the Heinrich Bunting map. It's Israel. Okay? So, to make an even finer point, let's talk about the Achilles heel of Europe. Because you've got to remember, Greece is protected by NATO. But there's this other country called Cyprus, sitting right to the west of Israel. It's only got 1 million Christians. Now, all I can tell you is if you want to understand why all of a sudden Greece, Cyprus, and Israel are forming a defensive economic alliance, is you just have to look at this map. And you understand that if Israel is there, Cyprus has got a reasonable chance of staying Cyprus. But could you imagine if Israel were not there, country of Cyprus, that's got 1 million Christians and has already been invaded in 1974 by Turkey, where Turkey has got 300,000 people in the north of Cyprus. So this puts an even finer point on it. But now we're going to get to really the intersection of this. Because when I was at the UN, I had to be UN-like. And if you look at this map, you'd say, Mark, you know, how are you conglomerating 210 million Muslims or 370 million Muslims into one militant military fighting force? That's a little bit of a leap, right, Mark? Well, the problem is it's not exactly a leap. And the reason why it's not a leap is because the prime minister, or who now is the president of Turkey, he's almost pulled a Putin. Turkey was supposed to be a democratic Muslim country until Erdogan came in. But in September 13th of 2011, Prime Minister Erdogan said in Egypt, an Egyptian, Turkish, this is after, everyone should understand, this was after Mubarak had neighborhood country in Egypt. All of a sudden, Erdogan, this was his favorite place to go and to express solidarity with. So he goes and he says to a thronging crowd, an Egyptian-Turkish alliance would form a force 150 million strong. And we are surrounding the Mediterranean. So it's not me that's saying this, it's Prime Minister Erdogan. But there's another thing about Prime Minister Erdogan. He recently said during the Gaza conflict, Israel surpasses Hitler in barbarism. Okay? Can you imagine, this is a moderate Muslim leader who is a NATO ally of the United States, saying that Israel surpasses Hitler in barbarism when Israel is never before practically in human conflict is one side sending leaflets to the other, texting, phoning, please leave your home or wherever, because we believe there are weapons there and we're going to be attacking it. That, and sending tons, as Prime Minister Netanyahu said, sending tons, while the war is going on, sending tons of humanitarian aid and relief to Gaza. So this is the Prime Minister of Turkey that's saying this. And my belief is that these are really two sides of the same coin. Form of force 150 million strong is also saying Israel surpasses Hitler in barbarism. Now I'm just going to stop here and I'm going to talk a little bit, for just as a segue, sort of an abrupt change, but I just want to tell everybody my first time at the UN, where I was going as a reporter. I went a little early, and I was listening to a UNICEF woman. UNICEF, you know those little blue boxes that you used to raise money for on Halloween time? And she was the Gaza UN representative. And she gets up there and she says one of the parties was trying to instrumentalize the UN and trying to evacuate areas so that they could affect military operations in them. She first didn't mention who, and a journalist said, oh, well, clearly this is Hamas. And she says, no, no, no. It was Israel. And the UN refused to assist them. I'm sitting there, and everyone's nodding their head, and I'm saying, everyone here is drinking Kool-Aid. This woman has just said that the United Nations was given notice by Israel that certain buildings were going to be bombed and certain areas were going to be bombed. And in her talk, she even said they gave hours notice. And what did the UN, not just UNICEF, the UN refused to assist Israel and notify people in the area. That is how bad it is. But now let's get back to the talk. So, why is all of this? What is Hitler's barbarism? What is 150 million people having anything to do with Israel? Well, now I'm going to go up and show my map a little bit. Can everyone hear me, or is the mic working? Yes. Great. Okay. So the biggest issue we face was when these two generals, you know, the Israeli left-wing general and right-wing general, they're really talking almost like two chess grandmasters, talking about a chess game that very few people actually understand where the pieces are and what the pieces mean. And so what I tried to do with my maps is actually explain to people what the pieces mean so they understand what these people are actually talking about. And what I first did was I created this map. And I'm going to give everybody just a quick tour over the map, in that if you look at this red line here, this is the Jordan River. This is the area west of the Jordan River, and this is the area east of the Jordan River. And by way of introduction, I'm going to tell my story that it's the one moment in my entire map experience where I knew I was onto something, and I knew it was big. About 22 years ago, I scored a meeting in the New York Times editorial board. I schlepped my map, put it down on the table, and you had the editors for the Times who were writing the very editorials you're reading today. And it was what I call my Wizard of Oz moment, okay, as you'll soon see. One of the editors points to this area right here and laughs and mocks me in front of the other editors and said, "That's a joke. You're never going to show me that that area is strategic. That's the West Bank. That you're never going to show. That's a joke." And I looked at him And I said, you know, you're absolutely right. That is the West Bank, and I'm not going to show you why that's important. I said, but that is not the West Bank we know and love to argue about. And I took this off. The actual West Bank is this mountain range here that you see. Okay? And the green line is this green line. So the West Bank is not just this little bank of the Jordan River, it's actually this mountain range. Now, once you see it like that, there's an additional permutation. I put my blue patch on there. Now, between the green line and the Mediterranean Sea is about 10 miles. And between the top and the bottom of this blue patch is about 40 miles. In this 400-mile square area is 70 to 80% of Israel's Jewish population and 80% of her industrial base. So what you're talking about when you're talking about the West Bank is this mountain range sitting right on top of what is the crown jewel of Israel. Now, that is going to become a vitally important thing to understand a little bit later in my talk. And so now, just that I've shown this, I'll jump back to the PowerPoint. You've got this whole mountain range, which is the mountains of Samaria, sitting right on top of. Now, when Moshe Ya'alon is saying that they're going to fire mortars or rockets into Ben Gurion, what he's talking about is from here, you can fire a rocket right into there. Now, one time I was speaking to a Jewish, if he's not 100 million, he's maybe close to a billionaire, who was a pro-peace process billionaire. And I'm showing him my map, and he looks at me, and he scratches his head, and he says to me, Mark, how many rockets have they fired? Okay. Now, I've heard all the arguments before, and unfortunately, I knew exactly where this man was going. And where he was going was on the scale of my map. If I go back to here, they've been firing, up to now, relatively short-range rockets from Gaza. This is roughly 20 kilometers or 12 miles. Like, not in this past conflict where they fired much, much longer rockets, which I'll show you. They've been firing these rockets. So what he was getting at was, Mark, how many rockets did they fire? And I said, Dan, they fired about 15,000. And he looks at me and he says, that's a lot of rockets. And I knew what his next question was going to be. And I said, Dan, you want to know how many people they killed? He said, yeah. And I said, about 22. And I said, so Dan, what you're really telling me is if the Israelis observed their speed limit, you'd save more Israelis in 1 year by observing the speed limit than all the Jews you lost over the past 10 years of rockets. He's silent because that was his argument, as crazy as it is. I said, but Dan, that's not the problem. The problem is, because of the area around the Gaza Strip, it's very sparsely populated as opposed to in this Sharon plain. So 15,000 rockets from the Gaza Strip is like firing a rocket from North Dakota into North Dakota. Apologies in advance if there's anyone here from North Dakota. No, the idea is you're not going to hit much with a rocket from the Gaza Strip, even though you can. The problem is, if you smuggle those same types of rockets into the West Bank and fire them from the West Bank into this densely inhabited population zone, it's like firing a rocket from Brooklyn into Manhattan. You're bound to kill someone. Or you're bound to hit Ben Gurion Airport or Tel Aviv. It's like firing from Brooklyn into Manhattan. So that's why the density issue is so important. And why the topographic map really shows that issue up. And so I have a graphic that shows the rockets. Now, everyone should understand what they've been firing from the Gaza Strip until relatively recently has not been a Katyusha rocket truck like you see. What they have been firing is one pipe at a time. Now, what does it take to smuggle in a pipe? Not much. That's why they've been able to smuggle in a huge amount of these rockets, because it's relatively simple and easily portable. But now we have the new entrant. In that up to now, or up until not only this conflict, but it beginning in the last conflict, there was a game changer. And what this game changer was it went from rockets that, can everyone see this? This is a CD that you put into your, your computer or your movies. Okay, this is, the width of this is about 122 millimeters. This was the width of the old rockets. Everybody see that? Okay, so the whole rocket itself, I'll show you in a bit, but if you look at the man to the left, you get an idea of how big it is and how portable it is. So these were the old rockets, everybody. Let me show you what the new rockets are. This is the width of the new rockets. Now, instead of going 20 miles, the new rockets go 100 miles. And what really happened in this last conflict is this is the game changer. Why? Because not only do they fire these rockets carry about 30 pounds of explosive and warhead. Now, I'm looking at all you, and I know my sister is here. I love her. Thank you for coming, Robin. I love you. Okay, and Robin curls 30 pounds all the time. She's a strong person. She's, okay. Now, I challenge anyone here without straining themselves next time they hit the gym to go to a 30-pound barbell and try to lift that thing up. Okay, don't do it. How many pounds is this warhead? We're talking 300 pounds of warhead. And so what happened, and when Israel is having to attack Gaza, and with these rockets, if I get up and I'll show you, and then you'll understand the whole gig. Is all of a sudden, overnight, instead of having rockets that sort of went this far and didn't do much damage, you had rockets that went this far and actually covered your entire population center. And so when Israel is attacking these rockets that are built near apartment buildings, this is what we're talking about in terms of the urgency of Israel attacking that military target, where they could be firing a rocket that hits this population center. Here's the next graphic, and here. Now, there's an additional problem in that during the last week of the war, a Palestinian pollster took a poll. This is not an Israeli pollster, this is a Palestinian pollster. in Gaza, of about 1,200 adults, if you want to call them adults after what you're about to read, and 88.9, this is after the war, or after the heart of the war, 88.9% support the firing of rockets from Gaza at Israel. Everybody should additionally understand that there were other polls taken by the Pew Center, which actually showed about 70% of Palestinians in Gaza Strip approved of suicide bombing in one form or another. So now you understand that the real hesitancy they had in going to 88% of suicide bombing is they felt we don't want to have someone die in the process of committing a suicide. Here, where there's less of a chance of someone dying, close to 90% of the Palestinians support suicide bombing. Now, what is this missile, this game-changer missile? Well, it's called the Khyber missile, and it's called the Khyber missile by Iran. Now, I don't expect people to really know what Khyber is about, but Khyber was a battle between Muhammad and the Jews of the Arabian Peninsula in 628, where he basically killed a bunch of Jews in the city of Khyber and enslaved a whole bunch. And so when you hear Muslims saying Khyber, Khyber, they're basically evoking the battle of Muhammad, where Muhammad defeated the Jews, and that's why the Iranians call this missile the Khyber rocket. Now, one should understand the real difference in this missile. It isn't just a missile where, like a Katyusha, you have these ball bearings that tear people's legs off and kill people. You have a 300-pound warhead. And I have listed here the various types of warhead that it is capable of holding. And one of the types is called a fuel air bomb. Now, I don't mean to be unpleasant, and I'm not going to go into the actual aspect of what the fuel air bomb does. It's in your material. But they call a fuel air bomb a poor man's nuclear weapon. And they call it that for a very good reason. It is beyond lethal. And it is, so when Israel is receiving these missiles from Gaza, they don't know whether Hamas has put a fuel air bomb on its warhead. They don't know if it's just anti-personal, prefabricated fragments. They don't know. They've got to do everything they can to stop that missile. And so when you see Palestinian children in the terrible pictures that we've seen, you have to understand the context of what we're talking about. The Israelis were trying to stop these kinds of missiles from being fired at them to begin with. Now, the myth is that it's Israel versus Hamas, or Israel versus the Palestinians. It's not. This is putting the world on its head. Hamas is merely an extension of Iran. And that's where they got these missiles from. And if you remember earlier this year, March of this year, there was a whole hubbubaloo that Israel stopped a smuggling ship. Well, guess what was on this ship that the Israelis stopped? 40 of these M302s. And there's no mystery why they're called M302s, because it's 302 millimeters. This is what Israel is up against. It is a nightmare. And it is a horrific, horrific thing. And you see, this was the ship, it was the Claw C. Now they caught 40 of these. Could you imagine if Israel hadn't the intelligence, hadn't the ability to stop this ship, those 40 would have most likely found their way to Gaza. So instead of having 300, let's just say, of these M302s to begin with, they would have had 340, maybe even 400. And who knows, one of those extra 40 could have been the one that slipped through. This is what Israel is up against. So now, just to give you a comparison between the Katusha and the Kaibar, you see the man on the left. He's got a Katusha on his shoulder. You see the Kaibar on the right. Now, why am I showing you this? I'm showing you this because one of the biggest untruths about the peace process is that somehow a demilitarized Palestinian state will solve the peace process. Now, the Israeli government, unfortunately, is as guilty in propagating this misconception. But if everyone thinks back, Katushas did not start after Hamas took over in 2006. Katusha started in 2001 or 2000 when Israel built the fence where they couldn't send suicide bombers over anymore. So they had to come up with something new. And their new thing was firing these rockets. And when Abbas, the president, when Arafat and the Fatah were in control of the Gaza Strip between 2000 and 2006, Hamas fired these rockets. And what did the Fatah government say? It wasn't me, it was Hamas. How am I supposed to stop every rocket from being fired? I can't police every single street. I can't stop these terrorists. All you need is two guys carrying a rocket, and you've got somebody who can fire a rocket. Now, whether they were serious or not, let's just assume they were. When Hamas came to power, what do they say now when these rockets get fired? Oh, it's the Salafists. We can't stop every terrorist. Why? Because it's a deniable weapon. Now, this is the key. Remember how I first started out, where you had the left-wing Israeli general and the right-wing Israeli general. And one saying you have to leave the West Bank and the other saying you have to stay. This is not, pardon the pun, rocket science. So everyone should say, well, what does the Israeli left-wing general have to say about this Katusha rocket? And this is where everyone needs to listen and listen carefully and understand what I'm about to say. The Israeli general will tell you, oh, as Amos Yadlin told me about 2 years ago, no problem, we'll reinvade the West Bank. That is this is way before, way before Iron Dome. And Iron Dome really only protects against bigger missiles. They don't protect against mortars or against Katyushas that are in the air for a relatively short amount of time. So what you're talking about is there is no defense to these short-range type of missiles. And the Israeli general who says you can give up the West Bank is not telling you the full story. In that he's not giving, it's a 5-act play. And he's just giving you the first act. Yeah, you can leave the West Bank. But now, everyone here is going to be able to process and decide for themselves, A, how smuggleable the pieces are from a Katusha, and how far they go, and what the left-wing answer is, and quite frankly, whether it makes sense or not. And anyone has to look at the Gaza Strip and say, my God, if Israel couldn't reinvade the Gaza Strip without massive casualties on everybody's side, what is going to happen in the West Bank? And just ask yourself a question. If America stopped all airlines going to Ben Gurion when Israel was in this last conflict, if you have these rockets, I'll show you in another slide, they can hit Ben Gurion Airport no problem. So, as I've described before, what do these rockets carry? They carry ball bearings. And on the left bottom, you see a product of the modern anti-Semitism, and as well as chemicals. Now, once you see this, and you look at the bigger picture, which I've talked about originally, where Moshe Yadlin and now, Ya'alon, Moshe Ya'alon said we need to find strategic interests shared with moderate Arabs. So in the first part of the talk, I showed you why Israel is thinking out of the box with Cyprus and is thinking out of the box with Greece, and you are seeing a burgeoning strategic alliance with those countries. Now, as just a short aside here, I walked into a congressional office once, about 2 years ago, and the LA said, my boss runs a tight ship, and we're really only concerned about the budget. And I look at her, and so I said, my hurdle is $3 billion. And she says, yes. And what is she saying? And she's saying to me that I have to show her why Israel is more important than $3 billion in the budget. And I look at her and I said, you know, that's just too easy. I say, the real number is 14 billion. And she looks at me and she says, what are you talking about? And I said, well, everybody on Capitol Hill knows that the foreign aid budget is 14 billion. So it's not going to get passed unless AIPAC lobbies for the 3 billion as part of the 14 billion. She says, are you here for Israel? I said, yeah. She says, yeah, that's actually the number. So I said, I have to hurdle 14 billion. She says, yes. So I took out what was the earlier part of the talk, and I basically asked her a question. If Israel gets destroyed and Cyprus goes down, how much is America going to have to put in its defense budget in years 2, 3, 4, and 5 to fund the defense of a core NATO country called Greece? She said, you just bought yourself another 15 minutes. The point is, I first showed everybody the Western critical nature of Israel's importance. Now, I'm going to show you the Eastern portion. Now, to show this, and to also talk about ISIS a little bit, and to bring it into a better context, I'm going to show a new topographic map that I have. And the new topographic map is a map of Iran, Iraq, Syria, and really Europe. Now, in the materials, there's this fold-out called the black gold triangle. What I'm about to show you is what everyone is really fighting over. And it's not Israel. When you look at this map, you'll see something very dramatic. Actually, if you start in this top map, and then I'll take you to the map that's up there. This top map is a map that's off the internet from a famous cartographer called Azadi. And he shows the oil and gases in the Middle East. And so what I've done, exactly where the critical oil is. But if I may, I just want to show everyone this map for a second. And basically what you're going to see is you see the mountains of Iran. Because right over here, this line here is the mountains, the western mountains of Iran, which are called the Zagros Mountains. Now, if you look at this map, all of a sudden you say, oh, okay, now I understand why Iran is Iran, and actually why Iran was an empire. Because it was rung with really what is a crown of mountains. Now, to get an idea of the mountains that we're talking about, over here, this is the Alps. These are the Alps. These are little babies compared to this range that you're talking here. Now, why is this so important? Because guess where Iran has put all of its nuclear facilities that are the key nuclear facilities? Inside of the ring. Okay? So anyone who thinks it's a chick-chack, little easy thing for Israel to fly all the way from here, past Osirak, where it bombed Iraq, and then just fly up into this hornet's nest of mountains, it ain't as easy as all that. So this is where the mountains are, but that's not the focus of what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is something totally different. And if you look at these maps, you will think back to your high school days, or earlier, maybe junior high days, where you learned about the history of Mesopotamia. Now, what does Mesopotamia mean? It means the land between the two rivers. And what are those two rivers? The Tigris and the Euphrates. And why do you have rivers? Because you have the mountains of Syria, mountains of Turkey, where the water originates. And you have the Fertile Crescent. You can see the crescent, where the Euphrates is on the west and the Tigris is on the east. Now, once you see this depression in this topographic map, all of a sudden, when you look at where the oil is, and if I could just take my plexiglass piece and do something different with it, which is just to give you an idea, and you put it right over that depression, that's where all of the oil is. Meaning, in Iran, virtually 95 to 100% of Iran's oil is not located all over Iran. It's located in this one area west of the mountains called Ahwaz. When you look at Saudi Arabia, you think, well, all of Saudi Arabia has oil. No. Just the eastern aspects have oil. The rest of Saudi, again, in Saudi Arabia, 95 to 100% of the oil is in 5% of the land in the eastern aspects of that black gold triangle. So now, two things. You have rivers. What are rivers? Rivers are agriculture. Where there's agriculture, there's people. And under here, this black gold triangle, now, does everyone understand where ISIS is likely going to be focusing its efforts? In Iraq. Right in between the two rivers, Mesopotamia. And you can look at the maps now of ISIS, and you will see the path of ISIS is in fact based on two primary geographic facts. One, the rivers, where near the rivers you have agriculture and you have population, and you have, if you control that, you control the area. And two, it's the Sunni areas that are containing the oil, which are underneath this red triangle. So, in understanding how and where ISIS is going to go, where it is likely to lead. You have to look at the geography, but then you've got a large number of people who, when they say the two-state solution, they don't mean two states living in peace with each other. They're really talking about a zero-state solution, which is no Israel at all. And they're just looking to get that hook in to get a Palestinian state that they can make all of this happen. And so you really have to get to the bottom when someone's saying that Israel is the cause of instability. You know, what exactly are you saying here? But getting back to one of the elements of what that congressman said to me, he said it's the cause of high gas prices. Okay. It's bad for the economy. The Arabs don't like us. And so I went to him and I said, well, you know, you've got Egypt here and Saudi Arabia here and Syria here, and I saw his eyes glaze over. God bless him. And so on my way back in the train that day, I made what is really the map that has stood me in good stead for 22 years, and which is the underpinning, in my belief, of what Bibi Netanyahu is truly talking about. Because Saudi Arabia was explicitly mentioned in his speech, as well as Jordan and Egypt and Bahrain and Abu Dhabi and these places. And so far, no one has said he's too crazy, which is really drama and maybe even history. And so my belief is that there is a commonality of certain strategic value to each other, that the moderate, as I will call them, of Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel, and Egypt, and even part of just this general area, that there is when I always used to think, oh, anti-Semitism, they're killing Jews in Israel, no one cares, they're bombing Israel, nobody cares. But ever since the Syrian war and the Iraqi civil war, I have a little bit of a different take on the classic anti-Semitism issue, in that, let's face it, how many thousands of Christians have been murdered in Syria? How many hundreds of thousands of Muslims have been murdered in Syria and in Iraq? Where are the Christians? You would have thought, gee whiz, it's understandable that when there's a suicide bombing in Israel, the Christians aren't standing up, or the Muslims aren't standing up for the Jews being murdered. But where are the Christians and the Muslims when Christians and Muslims are being slaughtered? They're not there. So the real issue is we've got real problems. Because if the Christians and the Muslims aren't going to stand up when the Christians and Muslims are being murdered, who's going to stand up when the Jews are being murdered? Nobody but Sarah and us. So what I did on my way home was I made a simple map which took what that congressman asked at core and made it simple. Meaning I didn't get upset with him that he said, what does it mean that there's no Middle East without Israel? What am I going to get upset with a congressman about? That's what his constituents are talking to him about. So I'm going to change his mind by just looking at him and saying Holocaust. So I said, okay, let's go on your basic assumption that a Middle East without Israel will bring stability, will bring lower gas prices, will bring any of these nirvana things to occur. So let's take Israel out of the equation. And in the first cell, I just take Israel out of the equation. I say, what's going to happen? Is Lebanon an independent Lebanon? Has Lebanon been an independent Lebanon for 30, 40, 50 years? The answer is no. So how is Palestine going to be an independent Palestine? The answer is it isn't. The only thing that's practically going to happen is you're going to get a little bit of a bigger Syria, Hezbollah / Iran in the north, and a bigger Egypt in the south. That's it. 22 years. People say, yep. Next step, Jordan. Jordan's practically not there now. Could you imagine if you either have an ISIS, Hamas, West Bank Palestinian state created to Jordan's east? And by the way, if you notice, I forget, I think it was Ya'alon, he's been coming up with great quotes. He said a Palestinian state would be catastrophic for Israel, but fatal for Jordan. That's with Israel still there. Could you imagine, God forbid, if Israel weren't there? Jordan would last 5 minutes. Those are the only 2 steps I need. Because look what happens, everybody. You've got Egypt, that is in control of the Suez Canal, got 75 million now, no, actually 85 million, sorry. 85 million people, control of the Suez Canal, and the leading Arab country, and the leading Arab military, all of a sudden having a land contiguous border with Saudi Arabia. You have Syria / Hezbollah / whatever taking over Jordan. Is anyone here seeing lower gas prices? Is anyone here seeing stability? No. What you are seeing is hyper-volatility, crazy volatility, which brings us back to my first map. Where is the new anti-Semitism of anti-Zionism leading? It is leading to a Western catastrophe, and it is leading to a moderate Muslim catastrophe that is a danger to the world and it is a danger to the United States, where we are going to have to, one way or another, defend Greece or pay for a Greece defense and send lives, and or somehow protect the moderate Muslims. And you go, if without Israel being there, could you imagine even landing, an American landing somehow in this area? So, getting back, let's think about Heinrich Bunting again. Have I shown that Israel is in fact the protective, stabilizing node from Asia into Europe? Yeah. And also protecting the moderate Muslims as well. And guess what? It's also protecting Africa. Because where is the caliphate going? It's just not going west. And that is why a secular Sisi Egypt is absolutely, positively vital as part of this whole mix. So, that is really the presentation. And you want to open it up for questions?